I disagree.
Okay, here we are. CodeCraft.
Yay!
Okay, so composite design pattern.
It's a tree.
Very good. Okay, so decorator.
I think that this one sentence sums it all up. Decorator lets you change the skin of an object, while strategy lets you change the guts. I don't know what else you need to know. There you go.
Let's talk about composite. Has anybody encountered the problem they're talking about with composite?
Sean?
Yeah, but I didn't do it that way. I did it like the classic, like, tree node way, where I probably should have done this. So,
It's okay. You're forgiven.
I don't know if composite is actually the solution for a problem you're doing.
Yeah,
But you may want to explain what your problem is.
oh, okay. My problem was I had a menu which, basically, as you clicked on buttons, it would expand out and show more buttons underneath it. And so I needed a way of tracking the nesting of the menu. And so I used the tree structure for that. And so maybe composite would have been a good way to have done that.
This is a great example of now you know that the pattern exists, right? 1 week from now, will you remember how to implement it? No. But you should remember, hey, there's a pattern. You may not even remember the name of it. There's a pattern that has something to do with trees and, you know, kind of a linked listy thing of kind of like expanding out. Or there's something there. So I have this problem that kind of looks like that. It quacks like a duck and it waddles like a duck. So maybe I should go look up this duck thing and see. And it may not be applicable, but it might be. Or it gives you a starting off point. Or you're like, that's sort of it, but not really.
Yeah. I guess I might be thinking of something else. You're talking about the Archmage tabs? Because that seems like, because when I look at the composite, it seems like one of the big things is being able to run logic on the top level that affects all of the children. And in your case, it seemed like you wanted to have it so that you click on a button and it loads a specific file. So it's not that you click on the top button and it affects all the child buttons.
It's both.
Okay, maybe that's piece of it.
So it needs to load a file, but it also needs to, like, show any, like, topics associated with it. So a good example might be, like, combat. And so there would be, like, a bunch of, like...
So you need some way to get the tree of any of these. So you need to be able to go, hey, here's this item. I want to see all of the children of it. Like, you want to be able to turn the children to the parent. Oh, yeah, then that makes sense. Okay, that's what you're saying now.
And I'm not...
I was thinking, like, just for clicking buttons, why do you need to, like...
this is a button handler, Josh.
It doesn't seem like what composite is solving at all.
Yeah, and I could be wrong. Composite may not quite be what I want because I don't want to show all the buttons underneath. Like, I want to show it at one level underneath.
Well,
so it's but not quite.
I guess I was thinking if you were, like, on a page, I don't know if this is what you're looking at, but if on the page of an Archmage, you wanted to look and say, hey, give me all the child pages, like, you know, you'd go to Wikipedia and you'd see on the side, like, here's sort of the table of contents. And then you sort of want different depths of table of contents. That seems like a great example of using this.
Yeah.
Because then you can, and actually, in my mind, that's using it to its fullest potential, because you can go to the top level and get that. You can also go to a lower level and get that. I mean, one thing that I could think of adding in that case is maybe you want to have, like, a max depth so that you don't go to the top level and get, like, 8 layers deep or something like that. But you could have that as an option.
For those that are watching this have no idea what we're talking about, there's a new in-game help system called the Archiopedia, based on the Civiliopedia, that Sean implemented. So that's why, that's the example.
You're breaking the fourth wall, Thomas.
Yeah, exactly.
To be clear, it's Archmage.
Sorry, Archiopedia.
Yes. It should be Archopedia because it doesn't, it's not a vowel.
This is not what we're here for.
Yeah, you're technically
Archmage is Archopedia.
Yeah, that's the one.
I was trying to think of other examples, and I think the other example also seems sort of related to what Sean's been doing too. Talking about buildings, I don't know, it sort of feels like it's almost composite. Like, it's not buildings exactly, but like thinking about the map and having different places where we're treating them very similarly. It seems like a similar sort of structure where you can get some benefits by thinking through as a composite, where you're not just thinking of it as a location and everything is a location. You can have other, like if we're doing map gen or something, and we're like, hey, we have 5 hexes over here, and we want to treat that the same as just putting 1 hex over here. That's where I'm sort of thinking of a composite coming in.
I think decorator would make more sense in this case, though.
Combination of both is what I was going to advocate for. So,
Well, it's, first of all, it's difficult to combine these two, but
yeah,
it's not a perfect example, but locations, as we use it in Archmage, where here's a location, okay, the whole planet, and then it has locations on the map that are within it, and then each location has what? Locations, whether that's a town is a location. What does a town have? It has buildings. Okay, so you have a building, then you go inside the building, and a building has rooms, and the rooms can have locations of drawers, and drawers can have locations of boxes, and it just keeps going.
We don't go that deep that way, but that would be a good use.
Well, we go to the building level.
Yeah.
And then in the dungeons we go to the room level, and I think also the way, Michael, that you were generating the stuff on the things in the dungeon room. So it's like, hey, I have a table and I can put some stuff on top of the table. What can I put on it? Oh, I can put a box, and I can put something on top of that box, and such. You get these kind of things. It's not exactly composite, but it is a similar kind of idea, problem space.
So I guess the question I would have is like, what's unique about composite that we don't just use? Like, is object-oriented programming where we reference other classes, is that just compositing in a nutshell? Like, say game, like the game script where you have a reference to player, right? And you have a reference to the map locations, you have a reference to all these different things. Is that a composite? I mean, to me, that's just what object-oriented programming you're doing all the time. So is everything in OOP just compositing things together then? Or what exactly is this design in particular trying to cover?
So in this case, composite, if you properly implement composite, which we did, we just did location has a what? Has a location, and then that's it. It's just like a linked list, like all the way down. But in this case, you can have an each or you can have a container. And so the container behaves like an each, and that's not what we have. So that's why I said in Archmage, location is not a perfect example. It's getting close, but it's not a perfect example. And in the refactoring guru, they gave the example of a hammer or a box of nails or something like that, right? Like, and so the box of nails behaves the same as the hammer. The client doesn't even know that it's a composite, like that it's been an aggregate of other things.
A classic example would be like in the UI, you have like a layout group, and you don't know what's inside that layout group, but the layout group can have lots of different items, it can have a couple items, but it's going to be treated just as any other UI element in the UI layout. So if you have a horizontal or a vertical layout group, and then you have a horizontal layout group inside it, you can keep on nesting, and Unity struggles with that sometimes. But like I think that's a composite sort of setup. Better. Okay,
so is it and this is for my understanding, is compositing more so like nesting like items, like so you can interact with them? So in locations you're nesting other locations, and then you're nesting more locations in that, or is it like, my understanding is it's a sum of everything. So like in object-oriented programming, game is the sum of the game. All the other components of the game kind of come from that.
It's what's special or different about it is the fact that it treats a container of things the same as one thing. I don't know how many UI libraries you've used. I've used the .NET Windows Forms drawing library for decades, and at the end of the day, everything's a control, and a control does what? It has like one method: draw. And from that draw, you get a button, which is drawing itself with a border and some text or whatever, right? So that's like one thing. And that's a one-to-one thing. Hey, I am a control of button, and I draw my thing. But then you get a list view. And a list view is like a whole bunch of things, but it still behaves as a single control with a single draw. So that's the difference, whereas in Archmage we have a location, which has locations, and we don't have the ability for a container to act as one, like that level of abstraction or indirection, right? It's not vague to the caller. The caller knows that it's a group and there's a bunch of them. In our case, I mean, if anybody is watching this video, which is a miracle, but if anybody's watching this video, they don't have access to our source code to see, like, oh, that's exactly how you implemented it. But a location can have any number of locations within it. Whereas in a UI library, you can create your own control. And usually when you create your own control, it's a whole bunch of controls that you need, because you need a header, and then you need to draw a little window, and then you need to put some stuff inside that window, and whether those are buttons. But the UI library just says it's one object and one control.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, I'm just looking at like the Refactoring Guru page, and I think the key thing is that the items that like you're talking about this composition share the same interface. So that's the important part too. So that's how it differs from your example of a game containing the map and the player, and that the game, the map, and the player don't share the same interface.
Yeah, okay. That answers that.
Good questions.
I thought it was interesting how in both the Refactoring Guru and in the Gang of Four book, they both kind of like seem to wrestle with problems with the pattern, with like keeping the interface the same with the leaves too, because you'd have like operations that make sense for the composite object, but then they don't make sense on a leaf. And so it seemed like neither of them really had a good solution. It's just like, hey, there's a thing, and it's going to smell a little bit, but there you go. I thought that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, I feel like that's kind of the solution I ended up going with my tree thing, is that like treating them as separate, like nodes. Yeah, so like I guess the leaf and the composite I guess are the same, but like the composites won't contain. Oh, sometimes they do contain. Oh, I don't know. Maybe I did use composite without realizing.
That's a sign of a good pattern.
I have to go back and look at it.
Can anybody think of examples in Archmage, or examples where Archmage could utilize this pattern?
I guess one of the things I've been talking about with the builder pattern, when we were talking about sort of like doing map gen, was I was really thinking in terms of a composite pattern at that point, because I wanted the builder to make me a composite. But I was just thinking of like turning the map into, thinking of just like, here's a system of locations that we want to put down. Let's put down a region over here, and let's put down some individual things. So I think it ties nicely with the builder in that sense, where you can work at different tiers and different levels.
One of the things that comes to mind for me is potentially if you have bags inside of your inventory. So I would think inventory where you have your items, and maybe your items can also be like bag of holding or things like that. So then you have inventories and inventories, and maybe you put two bags of holding in each other. Maybe you don't allow that, and you just have the black hole thing going on. But I would think that you could inventory in my mind is a spot where you could use that.
Yep, that's what I wrote down.
I love that. A bag holding a bag which holds the first bag.
Yeah, I don't remember. There's some sort of like specific rule about like, is it, Thomas, do you remember, is it like if you turn it inside out and you shove something, there's some rule about bag of holding where it's like it makes a black hole if you do something stupid with it.
I don't remember.
Maybe it's if you try to like put two bags of holding into each other, like, I don't remember. You press them. I don't remember what the exact rule is.
It's this incredibly rare artifact, the bag of holding. But if you happen to get two of them, watch out for this.
Yeah, I don't.
Don't cross the
I
streams.
think there's a specific rule. Well, that's a little different, but yeah. Yeah.
Okay, then decorator.
Sure.
I'm a little confused why you can't use the decorator and the composite together, because I would have thought you would, in some cases, want to add functionality and still have a bit of nesting going on.
I don't think there's anything that says you
Yeah.
can't.
I thought you said
You
that
did
they're
say
hard
that
to use
earlier.
together or something like that.
You said it's hard or something like that. I don't think you specifically said you can't. Maybe you did.
At the bottom of both patterns, they're like, so this is very similar to the other pattern, except it's doing it this way.
Right.
But you can use them both together easily if you want to extend functionality and composite. But I don't think you would want to use them together in the same way where you're like using the same method to do that. You can,
Right.
So you'd add a decorator to a thing which is a part of a composite, but
Right.
maybe not to the composite itself.
Yeah, like you might wrap a composite thing. That's what you mean.
Yeah, my first pass on it is if you're trying to implement both of them, it's because you don't understand your problem well enough in order to know which one it matches.
Right.
Or you don't understand the patterns well enough to know which one matches your problem, right? So you're like, I don't know, it kind of seems like both of these, so I'll just do both. So that's why I'm like, whoa, wait a minute, probably just want one of these things.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, so I guess if you're trying to think of something in a composite, I'm thinking of like you have a bunch of different things where you're all trying to work together in some way, whether you're storing it or displaying it or doing something across all of them. But then any individual of those components you might need to change or tweak at a certain level where I'm like, hey, I want to have like 5 different types of this thing, and then you're using a decorator to sort of change that functionality inside of it. But
Yeah, maybe I'm a little confused because I would have thought like a horizontal layout group would fit this description, where you don't want to just draw them, you want to change like some stuff about how you draw them. Like you want to draw them in a certain layout. You don't want to just draw them as they are. Or maybe I misunderstand that.
That would be the draw method on the horizontal layout group handling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But isn't
so
that extending the functionality, or maybe?
it's changing the functionality on the horizontal layout group, so the draw is overridden.
But you're not adding to the interface. Is that the difference?
no?
Well, then I'm thoroughly confused about the difference
I
between
mean, the
composite and
You're
decorator.
doing the same thing, you're just doing it for different reasons.
I mean, to me, it seemed fundamentally different, and I guess the main example that stuck out to me with Decorator was the idea of encryption and decryption. Because then, if you are taking, hey, here is my text encryptor, and then you put another encryption layer over it, and another encryption layer over it, then you can decrypt them in the proper order and get your proper result out. Composite isn't really made like. Composite isn't really made to do it that way. Decorator is about, hey, you can, like one of the big things is that you run the parent logic and then the child logic and then the child logic, and maybe parent-child isn't quite the terminology to use in this case, but that was more so what I was saying, is that it's a box and a box and a box and a box, and they each have different logic that you have a cascading effect where you're going in and going out, which is where I was thinking locations with the decorator pattern would make sense, where it's, okay, so you've got the hex location, okay, move into the hex location. Oh, we've got a child in this, okay, let's use the decorator pattern, go into the town. Oh, okay, we've also got a child here that we're trying to access right now, go into the building and that sort of thing, so that you're running the logic one after the other, and you're kind of getting closer to the depth level that you've gotten there.
I was thinking like about how an interface is not equal to an object. Like an object can have more than one interface. And the thing about the composite is that they share an interface, but that doesn't mean that that's all that they have to do. So it means like in terms of like UI stuff, the way that they're drawn can be a composite pattern because the client, which is the renderer, just sees the draw interface and it just draws, and then they just recursively draw down the tree. But that doesn't mean that each individual object can't have other things that they can do too, like changing layouts or handling clicks and things like that. They can still do other things. It's just that interface with how the objects relate to each other is a composite. If that makes sense.
It's a smart guy. If I hadn't already hired you, I hired you right now. Has anybody had a problem that Decorator solves?
I don't think I have at this point. I did think that it was an interesting thought of just, the running it over and over on the same object to basically expand the functionality, but there's nothing that's stood out to me at this point where I'm like, that would solve my problem over here. Like,
I'm finding
but nothing comes to mind.
I'm finding in retrospect that the screen fade thing that I did is kind of a Decorator pattern, because I thought, there's no way of telling necessarily what features you're going to want during the screen fade with music or screen effects or whatever else. So I made just sort of like a general abstract thing, and then I made another thing that plays sound, and then I made another thing that plays screen effects and that kind of thing, and then you chain them together, and then they do the forwarding of requests with adding stuff around it. And I realized that actually I guess that is kind of the Decorator.
Well, if I haven't hired you already, I'd hire you right now.
That's nice. I guess the question I'd have is, like, what is it? Like, are proxies, like internet proxies, just decorators for your internet traffic? Because the interface is kind of the same, and it's adding functionality, doing something on top of it, and then passing the data along to the original plugin or whatever the original use, the original server.
I think the proxy is the proxy pattern.
Oh, there's a proxy pattern? Okay.
That's just a wild guess.
Let's see. That could be.
I don't know. Maybe Tyler.
Okay.
One phrase that I really liked from I think it was Refactoring Guru. I did have to go read the Gang of Four book on the Decorator, because it wasn't. There's things that Refactoring Guru doesn't say that is in Gang of Four, right? And then there's additional things that he does say, but I felt like there was something missing, so I went and read it in there, and it actually helped. So I guess Refactoring Guru isn't as amazing as I said it was. It's still pretty amazing. I like his examples a lot better. Anyway, so this phrase, it offers pay-as-you-go approach instead of trying to support all foreseeable features. That's a good smell test for should I be using the Decorator here? Because it's like, I don't know what all the things are that somebody's going to want to do. And it sounds like this is what Zach did with his like fading thing. He's like, I know we need to fade out for studying, and we need to fade out for passing big chunks of time like sleeping, and we need to fade out for these other things. But there's like, I don't know all the things that are going to be in, so hey, I'll implement this generic thing, and it's pay as you go. It's like, oh, you got a complex thing? Great. I've already given you the framework for it, and now do your complex thing that you need to do, and it doesn't. You don't have to change anything at the top level.
Okay, so the adapter versus proxy versus decorator. This is my understanding. The adapter is you're taking one interface, it could be kind of whatever your interface is, and it converts it and morphs it to a different interface.
Yeah. So
the two interfaces don't have to align really, other than the fact that they're adapting. Whereas a proxy is going from one to one. The interface you have receiving is the same interface that it's kind of pushing data through. And then the decorator it's the same interface, it's one-to-one, but it's actually more so, it's like you have this one-to-one plus whatever else you want. Right? So you're adding on to that interface rather than just keeping the interfaces the same.
That's a good summary. Although I think you've read Proxy more recently than me, so I'll just trust you on that one. But yeah, that seems like the right thing.
Okay.
If I hadn't hired you already, I'd hire you right now.
Oh, thank you.
You gotta get another one to catch up with Zach though.
That's right.
You've only
It's not a
hired him
competition
twice.
though.
No.
But, now I know when we were talking about a lot of the hex map stuff, I think we talked about the decorator for a little bit. And I don't know if that really would have helped in some senses, because I think the way you split it apart probably gets us most of what we need and we can think in terms of decoration, but actually we don't need to wrap around the classes. Or maybe that is what we did, I don't remember. But I'm curious what your thoughts are on pattern.
Yeah, I didn't quite catch everything you said.
Were you like Zach, where you accidentally implemented the decorator pattern without knowing it? When you're working
No, I don't think so. I didn't accidentally use the decorator pattern.
Alright.
Yeah, I don't know what I don't know exactly what it was that you would use. It was kind of a bunch of different things. But I don't think decorator would fit in that.
One thing that comes to mind where I could use the composite pattern, the problem that I've been trying to figure out how I want to solve it is, although it's low priority at this point, and I think there's only so far I can take it, is with the loading screen. So with the loading screen, there's sub-items that are passed back up where it's like, oh, okay, do this logic. Well, I'd like to track the progress on that, because that's a big piece, but I don't really want to break out all of the items and put them at a higher level. So, again, I think this can only be taken so far in that case, because I don't want to go into every individual method in the game that's called and make that into a child class. But I can take that to a certain level and have it so that, okay, these are handled as a loading action or whatever, and then loading actions can contain loading actions, and then you've got this kind of setup where it can end up tracking the duration so that we get a loading bar that's not just do after like a minute here and like 2 seconds here, things like that. So
I don't believe you have to subclass for a composite. I think you can just use an interface. But
yeah, but at some point it becomes just an action, like a method that we're running at the lowest level. But we could just have a wrapper for that, basically. Again, I don't know how deep we would want to. We wouldn't want to take that too deep because then it just makes the rest of the code base kind of clunky, unfortunately. But there's an extent to where I can put that on certain levels. Like for the save and load system is the main thing that I'm thinking of. That's an extent where it would be nice to be like, you've loaded half of the game or a quarter of the game, or like you've loaded this percentage of the files. That seems like useful information.
You're talking about decorator, right? Not composite.
I was thinking in this case, composite seems to make more sense.
Okay.
Because of the way that it iterates over everything and is used. Like when they're talking about using it for sums, I'm thinking, what is the number of tasks that we can tell the parents that we have resolved at this point?
Are we done talking about decorator?
I have a question about it. So one of the things I always struggled with decorator is it sounds great in theory. I'm like, I don't have to have all of these different classes where it's like a specific class each thing. Because I can just build my classes on the fly. So I think at one point I had a class when we were talking about it, and we're like, oh, let's just create a new thing and essentially use like decorator add buffs or something onto it. And it didn't really work. But one of the things we kept on running into that I never really learned how to solve was how to get a reference to a decorator object and to then change it. Because I was playing with like a tower defense game. I was like, can we level up our towers by adding in a new ability to them through a decorator class? Because we were exploring the pattern and we're like, let's try that. But now all of a sudden, I have a tower with ability class, and so even though it has the same interface, it can still be used in the same place as a regular tower. All of the references to this object in the game now have to be updated with a new object. That was something I never really figured out a good way of doing. Ended up just creating like this final wrapper that everyone referred to, and you could change the guts of it. And it essentially turned it into a strategy pattern with a decorator inside of it. And I'm just like confused. But like, it's always been a thing where I'm like, it seems hard to make. And I think that was one of the complaints where it's like, yeah, you might end up with some ugly code as you're trying to then generate this object. So you probably end up throwing into a factory method or some upper construction pattern. But Yeah, I'm just curious, like, how do you resolve those things? Because I don't know how to go and change an object with a decorator, it feels like, because then every reference to that means the new reference, rather than the old one.
First, I want to applaud your interest in tower defense games. I want to recognize that. Secondly, I do like you pointing out that you can do things right and well. Hey, I'm implementing this pattern right and well. And you end up with crappy looking code. So crappy looking code doesn't necessarily mean that it's crap code. It's just, it's difficult to implement certain proper things. It's not a 1-to-1 ratio. And so when you go and you look at code, you're like, this doesn't make any sense. What in the world was this person doing? Oh, they're clearly an idiot and stuff. It might just be hard to implement a decorator pattern. As for your core question, I don't really have an answer.
No.
One of the reasons I went to the Game of 4 book was because I was trying to think of, have I really encountered this problem and this was the solution? From the refactoring guru, it didn't tweak anything, so then I went to Game of 4, and the only thing I come up with was like a messenger system. And I know that's really close to this notification example, but a messenger of publish and subscribe, or if you're implementing messaging, not message sending, but messaging within a system, within an architecture, and you need things to be able to send messages around, whatever, this decorator thing might be a solution there, but outside of that I couldn't think of anything else.
I did find their example really odd because maybe I'm misunderstanding how they'd be using it, but I don't know why you would want a Facebook wrapper around an SMS wrapper or around a Slack wrapper. Like, that doesn't make sense to me.
They were chaining.
Yeah, chaining makes sense, but at that point, why would
they weren't wrapping?
Okay, so at that point, why wouldn't you just have a list of notifiers at the top level or something like that? That's mainly what I'm confused about. I'm trying to figure out why is this the solution that they're looking at for this problem? And maybe I'm misunderstanding what kind of problem they're trying to solve. Because what I imagine is that, hey, we have, like, for example, your doorbell ringing. Okay, we want to tell you via Facebook. Well, that's a terrible example anyway. Our business released a new product. Maybe it's via SMS, Facebook, and Slack. We send you messages. Okay, so I guess that when I'm thinking of the notification system, they seem like three different ideas. I can understand why you would look at subclassing them so they have similar methods and all of that. Like, that makes sense. I can see why. But but wrapping them around each other, in my mind, that implies that there is some logic that you want them to be acting on each other in some way, and I wouldn't think that you would want them to act on each other in any way.
Not maybe these examples, but you might have a reason to change the messaging that you're sending to all of them. And so, like, the decorator, it basically, if you go with the list approach, you're coupled to the logic of whatever you put in that list, right? Whereas the decorator allows you to change what you do. And so, like, I mean, the example is the encrypt decrypt. And so I can't think of exactly what you'd want to do to a notification, but maybe you want to up the urgency level or something like that, or something like that. Maybe there's a way you want to change it. And you can do that with this pattern, whereas if you just had a list, you wouldn't be able to do that without having to wrap it in something and do that. So
the decorator wouldn't solve an urgency level because you'd need to set that at the top level, or else each level would increase the urgency level. So that wouldn't solve that problem.
I think your hunch is right. I think his example is quite arbitrary, or it could be handled more simply in a different way. But the guy's stuck trying to come up with an example of decorator, right? And so that's why you're looking at his example of decorator, and you're like, well, I could solve that a lot simpler in this other way. And so that's where I was stuck trying to think of, outside of creating a universal notification system or whatever. I'm not sure exactly what this applies to.
The example I've always heard, or not an example, but the core problem solved is mass explosion. So I can't think of any examples right now, but if we ever end up at a place where we are creating new classes because we need that extensibility, then this is a way to handle that. I think, especially with the notifier and the other stuff like the examples we're doing here, the simpler approach is you just do it via the data. Like you just change a couple pieces here and there, and you don't do it at the class level. So you're not trying to just add on top. And maybe that's the other case. Maybe it's when you're working with stuff where it's outside your control. It's like you can't change the base class, but you need to add functionality onto something that you're getting from somewhere else. So whether you're using a library or something else and you don't have access to this data, you can create a wrapper around it and add the functionality you need. But I don't know.
Yeah, I do find it interesting that he led with the example he did, because the one where they talk about the data is way more compelling. Like,
I agree.
yeah, you know, like I can understand you want to maybe you do want to encrypt data, maybe you do want to compress data, and the way you stack those, depending on how you do it, might be different, and there might be other things you want to do with the data. So that makes a lot of sense to me. I understand it better when I see that than I do the first example, I will admit.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's not a lot of examples, except for what you were just working on with the save files, Josh. But there's not a lot of examples where you're like, I need to compress and encrypt this stream, right? Like, you need that when you're, I don't know, writing things to web services, or you're saving things to a file system or something like that. But outside of that, when do you apply this pattern? I don't know, maybe you don't.
Yeah, encryption decryption is the only straightforward example that I can think of where it's maybe you want multiple levels of encryption or things like that, and making sure that the order of encryption decryption is the same is really important. Because if you screw that up, then you're you could also just have a list of encryptors and then reverse the list when you go. So there's different ways of solving that, but this would, in this context, you could use that, and I can see that.
Yeah, I suppose the advantage here is that they've stacked encryption and compression, which your list of encryptors wouldn't solve. So that's where I can see this pattern comes out. It's like when you want to do different things with the data, not necessarily just the same thing.
Yeah. When you want to operate on the same data, is that what you're saying?
Depending on what you mean by same data, yes.
So the second thing is reliant on the first thing's output.
Yes.
That's
yes,
what
yes.
I mean.
Yes.
Yeah. So in a publish subscribe messaging system notification thing, it's like, hey, does anybody care that the player just died? And there's an end screen, it's like, I care, and there's a sound effect, it's like, I care, or whatever. They don't work on each other's data, right? They just all flat fire, and that's why you don't need this pattern. But in this case, if you're like, I need the data from whoever else was dealing with this thing I need the output of that before I can go and do my step, right? The compression after encryption, for instance, then you do need this pattern.
One other thing I'll point out, I find it interesting just looking at these patterns because we're using object composition to solve our problem rather than I don't know, a simpler class approach or something else like that. And so that is something that reading through these has helped me sort of see, there's different ways of tackling problems. So I think I was complaining about this earlier, but some of the stuff I'm doing with simulatable or for just-in-time stuff is I need a way to say, hey, I'm going to use this object to handle all the stuff inside of it. And then I can treat everything as if it is the object, rather than treating it as if it's something separate. And I've just found that to be a useful thing to try every now and again, so I don't have to work with everything's inheriting from the same thing, or whatever.
Great. Anybody else? Okay, well, another good CodeCraft. It was not 5 minutes. We've yet to have a 5-minute one. That's good. Okay, so next time is the next two, which would
Facade
be
flyweight.
Facade and Flyweight. So we'll see you next time for Facade and Flyweight.
Make sure to like and subscribe.